Welcome to the Roetzel Health Law Hotspot. Health Law Hotspot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hello, everyone. This is Ericka Adler from Roetzel and Andrus, and this is the Health Law Hotspot. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about a fantastic topic related to the COVID-19 vaccine and some of the issues that are challenging employers today. We represent many different kinds of healthcare providers, and some of the most common questions that we're getting right now are, can I force my employees to be vaccinated? Can I fire an employee who refuses to be vaccinated? And similar questions. I'm very excited to have two great guests with us today. The first is a shareholder at Roetzel and Andrus and my partner, Aretta Bernard, who is the practice group leader for the Employment Litigation Group. We also have a fantastic guest, Dr. Kevin Trangle. Dr. Trangle is board certified in internal medicine and occupational and environmental medicine. He's on the COVID consulting staff at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation and University Hospital Case Academic Teaching Faculty. He's currently medical director and consultant to several organizations trying to stay in business during the pandemic. His clients include schools, domestic shelters, mental health outpatient facilities, addiction medicine treatment centers, stores, restaurants, law firms, and many others. And we're very excited to have both you and Aretta with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So let's jump right in here. And I thought it would be a good place to start with Aretta and have her just kind of set the framework for the legal background here. How is this vaccine different than other vaccines? I mean, there's been other vaccines around. So how are employers really handling this differently? And what guidance legally has been made available to employers so far?
Thanks, Ericka. It's a pleasure to be with you here today and to respond to this rather hot and quickly evolving topic in today's world. Recently, in mid-December, the EEOC did grace us with some guidance regarding the legal implications of a mandatory COVID vaccine. So we now know from the EEOC that employers may mandate a COVID-19 vaccination process. But the big question is not so much whether employers may mandate it. The larger question is whether they should mandate it legally because of the legal implications and pitfalls associated with a mandatory vaccine. And I think the difference between this COVID-19 vaccine and other previous vaccines is by virtue of the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic that is in this century unprecedented. And so there have been so many unprecedented moves in the employment area vis-a-vis its impact or the employment relationship vis-a-vis its impact because of the pandemic's impact upon the situation, including, years ago, who would have thought that we would be able to take temperatures of our employees as they enter the premises and ask them questions about their personal health condition, but that's been permitted in light of the pandemic. So here we are in a situation where, although the EEOC has given guidance that you may mandate a vaccination for COVID, the question is, should employers do that? Because there are ADA implications. There are implications of possible violations of GINA, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And there is also implications under Title VII for mandating the vaccine under provisions that prohibit religious discrimination. So those are the factors that I think employers need to consider. And again, this guidance was given in mid-December, so at least we have some ideas. And if employers are going to mandate, how they can try to avoid these pitfalls, including having employees go to unrelated third parties like their own physician and pharmacies to avoid data collection of medical histories that would or could potentially impinge upon the prohibitions of the ADA. So that's just one area that one pitfall that employers need to look into, because that would then lead to a whole host of other legally required actions, such as dealing with the employee to determine, if there should be an accommodation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's it's quite a whole new world out there in terms of the evolving issues regarding, the concept of mandatory vaccinations. And I think the bottom line is this: although the answer is yes, employers can do it, most employers, and we're seeing this day to day, and today there was just an article locally published by Cranes Cleveland that most employers are opting to encourage and incentivize employees to get the COVID-19 vaccination as opposed to mandating it.
Right. Well, and that leads me to a really important question. And I don't know if you or Dr. Trangle are the right one to answer this, but from a practical standpoint, there's different kinds of employers and different kinds of employees. So we have the supermarket situation, and then we have a dental practice, right? And those are very, very different situations. So from our perspective in my group, we represent healthcare providers primarily. And so a dental practice or a healthcare practice that's interacting with patients, perhaps they're patients that have healthcare issues, or, when you do dental work, there's a lot of aerosolized, activity, which puts people at higher risk. So do we look at this question of should they differently depending on who the employer is? Is that analysis different? And I guess maybe Dr. Trangle, you're the right one to answer that.
I think I am, and I think the answer is yes. What we did not say is I've been medical director of Mount Sinai Hospital. I did that for about 10 years. So we had this question come up. Vaccination is not a new question. I mean, the extent that the public knows about it, the extent that it's an issue in our society is completely different than it used to be. And people are, because of that, are very concerned. I mean, right now, for example, if you look at what's happening in the world here, in terms of vaccination rates, you can see here on this slide here, which I think you can all see, that the United States is right here it's moved up a lot, but it's still not very high. It's here at 3.37%. That's how much we vaccinated of our population. Israel is at 25%, by far leads the world. And the two countries that made peace with Israel and have a treaty are the United Arab Republics and Bahrain. And because of the logistical support, they are actually very high, higher than anybody else. You start tracking down, you see where the other countries are. United Kingdom, despite their other problems, are almost at 5%. In Germany, which I lived in Germany, it's one of the most efficient countries I've ever seen in my life. Everything's alles in order, everything's planned out, but they just can't get the vaccine. They have everything planned. They have the centers open, the people, logistics, the trains, the transportation, the quality assurance. They just can't get the vaccine. So they're way down here. And some countries don't even register here. I mean, France barely registers, Mexico's down here. So vaccination is going to take a while. Even though we're talking in this country having issues, when you look at the rest of the world and our ability to travel and vaccination making it safe, it's not going to happen for a year or more. It's not going to be this year. The US, maybe at the end of this year, will have a change in how we do things. The rest of the world, it's going to be a couple of years. They just don't have the money. We don't have the vaccines available. And if you look at the states here, the different states here, you see it's highly variable. The highest we have is 5.5%, which is the darker ones, but the majority are not. Wyoming, is way down here, and some of them are even less. Florida has a very interesting way of doing things. It's I was just in Florida. It's the Wild West there, basically. And you can go to CVS, you can go to the public supermarket, you can go on this website, that website, you can wait in line in person on the ground, you can wait in the car. I mean, you just look around and you can find a place. You may spend hours doing it, but you can find a place. Ohio, by contrast, it just had a new mandate go into effect. You have to be 80 years old. We just had a meeting at the Cleveland Clinic yesterday saying that if you're not 80 and you're still a doctor, you're going to have to wait. So they're getting preference, and that's mandated by the state. Anyhow, to get back to your original question, it is very different depending where you are and depending what you do. It makes a big difference. When I was medical director at Mount Sinai, and actually I'm very involved now, what's called the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine, which is made up of about 2,000 doctors that specialize in medical directorships. In our group, we run medical direction of all the largest hospitals in the country: Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Mass General, et cetera, et cetera. So as medical directors, we actually are in constant communication talking about Corona, what we do. You can mandate vaccination, and in the hospital setting, we do sometimes. And even we've been doing it for flu, we've been doing it for varicella, we've been doing it for a long time. The issue is when you do it, as you mentioned, you have to write and offer your employees alternative employment. you have to try to accommodate them if you're not going to let them go. And how you accommodate them and whether you get rid of them or put them in someplace else depends on your options, your resources, the size of your organization, etc. It can be done, but like you said, it entails some issues. You're also correct. And today, everybody in the medical profession, as well as all the other clients I have, we're trying to incentivize people. We're trying to bribe them. We're trying to give them gift cards, give them other kinds of incentive to get tested. Surveys have shown that up to 49% of people, even in the medical setting, we're talking about paramedics and nurses, and even some doctors don't want to get vaccinated. They're afraid. They think it was a rush to market. They're not sure of the safety profile, and they want to see a few more million people and see what happens to them before they start taking the vaccine. To tell you the truth, I was probably in that group myself at the very beginning because it was rushed to market. 1/10 of the time it usually takes to do a vaccine. And when you only have 30,000 people and you only have a couple months under your belt, you don't know what's going on necessarily. However, now we have several million people. We're getting to 2 to 3 month period of time, and we're seeing the safety profile is much better. And although there are side effects are not fatal. There's some very predictable with any virus. And I think now the tide will be turning, that people will be getting vaccinated as medical professionals, not only politicians are rushing to show if we can get vaccinated.
All right, the great question. So if it can be mandated, I guess, in a healthcare setting, which is kind of what I'm hearing you say, Aretta, what do we do for the doctors and the dentists out there? They're not hospitals. There's not a lot of other job options. I mean, if you're a hygienist, you're a hygienist, right? If you're an OB-GYN, you're an OB-GYN. What does an employer do for, actual medical professionals who don't want to be vaccinated, as opposed to office staff, so to speak, who still need to be there? If you're the receptionist, you're the receptionist, right? So how do we treat those different kinds of employees differently in terms of handling their refusal to be vaccinated? And, where are we kind of creating some legal issues in terms of how we handle that?
Well, Ericka, as you know, there's no legal shoe that fits all sizes. However, generally speaking, I think the best way to handle employees who are for some reason refusing a vaccination in a setting where the employer has decided to mandate vaccination is to sit down and have an interactive dialogue with that employee as to what the basis is for why they are refusing. If it is a health condition, they would have under the ADA obligations to have an interactive conversation with that employee and determine whether or not an accommodation is feasible. In a small setting, if an employer can establish that a refusal to obtain a vaccination would pose a direct threat, and in this case, it would be the proliferation of the virus to patients and others in the work environment potentially, then you have to decide whether there's a way to accommodate that person. Is this a staff person that can work remotely, for example, or if it's a religious type of opposition to vaccination, there's an analysis that the employer would have to go through in order to determine whether or not that's a valid objection and whether or not that can be accommodated. So the bottom line would be, the best approach would be if there is a refusal to explore the basis for the refusal and to engage in the legal discussions that need to take place in order to determine whether an accommodation is possible. There are some employers like hospitals also that have union employees, and their union contracts may require bargaining with the employees that are members of the union. So that there would be implications for large employers that may not necessarily be there for smaller, like dental practices or OB/GYN small practices. There's also the possibility that the employer is so small that some of these laws will not apply to them, in which case they should look into whether their state law has a comparable statute to the ADA or Title VII, for example, that would implicate their legal obligations with that employee. That's why there's no one size one-size-fits-all discussion when it comes to these issues. So smaller employers may have legal obligations under state statutes. Larger employers will have legal implications under both federal and state law potentially.
I've been involved in both those. I know when I was medical director of Mount Sinai, I know from my colleagues who are currently medical directors, there are unions. It's not unusual to find unions in these large organizations, these hospitals, and these hospital networks. And typically, you do have options in the sense that there are a lot of jobs, and you can accommodate people by moving them here or there. We've already seen the religious objections to being vaccinated, at least purported religious objections to be vaccinated, even though it's so new. We've seen it with varicella, we've seen it with other influenza. We're also beginning to see it now here too. So in larger organizations, which so far have not yet mandated, but I expect they will mandate this as the time moves on, just like they have with other vaccines. But I don't know any that have actually mandated yet. It's just too new. They're concerned about the safety profile. They think the workers have a legitimate concern when they express issues regarding that. So they are accommodating, they're incentivizing, but they're not forcing. The unions discussions typically, and I've been involved not only in healthcare, but in a variety of different kinds of situations, usually safety and direct threat take precedence over the union contracts. I mean, you're the attorney, you can tell me, but that's been my experience working through this. When you get to smaller offices, like you said, there's less accommodation possible. I mean, they're small, they're running on tight budgets, etc. There are a couple accommodations that you could do though. One is you can actually farm your person out to a different organization, maybe a big organization that needs a utilization nurse and do something else. There's organizations that are actually accepting healthcare workers or other workers, moving them to other completely different companies where they don't have the exposure because they're not willing to get the vaccine. That's a possibility. We've seen it not just with vaccination, but in other ways also. One of the things I also do, I'm a medical consultant for a genetic testing company that has the PCR testing, has saliva and swabs. You can also do accommodations through that way. In other words, if you're a small office, you can mandate that everybody there has to be tested, let's say once a week, and they have to test. They're not in situations where they're going out to multiple parties and they're going to the picnics and bars and things of that sort. And I think if you do that, you can keep it reasonably safe. Your office accommodating that way. It's more expensive. It costs $100 per test, of which insurance will be balking as time goes on. I see it happening already about paying it. Up to now, they've paid everything. But as time goes on, they're not going to pay it unless you have a true exposure. So those are a couple of things that can be done and that are being done.
Right. I guess, it's really going to be the public that kind of pushes this along. I mean, some people don't believe in masks, they don't believe in vaccines, but you've got a lot of people who have been very, very careful for a very long time. And as they start coming out, they're going to want to go only to the dental offices or the doctor's offices where they are saying our staff has been vaccinated, right? Or our employees are vaccinated. So I guess it's kind of curious to see how that is going to impact some of the decisions that employers make. Obviously, it doesn't change the legal analysis. I mean, if you can't force somebody because of a disability or religious belief, et cetera, or, if you can or can't accommodate, that's one thing. But I'm kind of curious as to how you think the public will impact how employers are going to react, because it will change. Employers have a certain perspective, but at the end of the day, they want business, right?
You know what I propose doing? I'm working as a medical consultant for a sanitation company too. That basically goes out and sanitizes the exposure, or prophylactically we do it too. So we're thinking of developing the medical supervised seal of approval for an organization. We put it on the door, just kind of like for those that keep kosher, like the kashrut sign. We put it on the door. This is a vaccinated facility. This is a medically supervised safe facility with masking and social distancing.
I saw something like that people were doing for like nail salons and hair salons, where it was like, COVID clean and seal of approval, and they would, have it out there on display. Which
the problem is, we're not good housekeeping. There's no real seal of approval. Anybody can go to the corner store and their own computer and print out their own seal of approval. But how do you brand that as being credible?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, Aretta, do you think that there will ever be a movement, from the EEOC or any other government organization to push it a little further? I mean, we're hearing about people having to show they've been vaccinated to get on airlines, or people having to show vaccination maybe to go back to school. I mean, it seems like there could be a little bit of government push that kind of directs some of this decision making that's a little bit different than other vaccines in the past. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure how the federal government will impose a mandatory vaccine, process, given constitutional potential challenges, et cetera. And I'm, no expert in those challenges, but I suspect that, like most large employers, the government's going to probably promote a push for everyone to be vaccinated and incentivize as much as possible everyone to be vaccinated. I think that the best way to probably effectuate that is to publish as soon as the information is developed regarding the safety of the vaccine and the very few negative impacts of becoming vaccinated, to allay public concern and fear over the concept of such a new vaccination and the thought of being compelled or forced to take it, to balance those particular opposing concerns, I think would be important. But I'm not sure that we're at a point where anybody and from the federal side will be able to mandate the vaccination. But legally, that's really a larger issue.
Right.
When it comes to these issues, I don't think the U.S. is a leader. I mean, we have so much litigation, we have so much individual rights advocation here that is different. You go to other countries and what you see is completely different. I don't know how much you guys have traveled or you see what's going on, but in order to get on a plane now, you have to have a negative PCR test 72 hours before you go. Even then, you fly to Australia, even with your PCR test, they're not going to let you walk around the population. They're going to put you in a hotel for $3,000 for 2 weeks with an ankle bracelet. You cannot leave. And if you're a citizen of Australia, they do it too. And they do the same thing in Israel. You go into quarantine. Israel, they enable your phone. They follow you on GPS. You go 1,000 meters from your house, and they're there. The police are there. They have roadblocks, and they're everywhere. It's not like this country. And this is many countries, and it's become the same in many of the European countries. In Germany, they have the technology. So I think what will happen in these countries, just like the mandating PCR testing, ultimately they're going to mandate vaccination, and we're going to be a follower. This is my prediction.
Right. And I think employers are really going to hopefully lead the way, especially some of the larger employers, in setting kind of the standard. But Dr. Trangle, from your perspective, let's talk a little bit about OSHA. When we were talking earlier today, I mentioned that some of my clients had received OSHA complaints filed by employees claiming that they felt there was inadequate protection going on in the workplace. And that really had to do with PPE and policies, and I don't know if it was cleanliness or what the issues were. Well, how does OSHA fit into the workplace in terms of the vaccine?
OSHA, I think the vaccine at this point in time has not yet been adjudicated. I don't know them in any particular case in any particular organization. There's not that many OSHA inspectors. I know some of them personally. I mean, there's one of them who's worked with me. There's only a handful throughout the country. There's really not that much. But in general, what they have mandated, they first of all did a couple things. They took the bull by the horns and they said that, look, if you have like you said, a PPE program and you have to wear any kind of respiratory protection, including an N95, you need to have a respiratory program. And OSHA, as you know, has begun finding companies that have not done that, particularly in nursing homes, but all around the country, they've been doing that. So I think people have got the message now that if you're going to wear an N95, which is a certain kind of mask like this, there's an N95 like this. There's also the Chinese knockoff, which is called NB95, which works about 10% of the time, and the other 90% up for grabs, but it looks good. You look like you're compliant. So they have mandated that. And they've also, the other thing they've mandated is you don't have to do extensive contact tracing. You don't have to do any of the things at the health department, but most companies, all the large companies I know are doing that because the health departments are overwhelmed. They just cannot keep up. And the employers, like you said, want to know for their own employees what's going on. Some of them have a very sophisticated screening programs, follow-up and contact tracing programs. Procter & Gamble, I know for sure. I can just reel off a number of companies that do this. Yeah, they spend millions literally on doing this mass screening with temperature gauges that can check 20 people at a time, and you walk in, they categorize you, they do facial recognition, they tag your temperature with you, probably against the constitutional guidelines, maybe, I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but they have this software out there to do this. When it comes to vaccination, just like in the healthcare organizations, you can, it's not just the ADA, OSHA has the same requirements to vaccinate in healthcare for any employer. As a hospital, as a mental health institution, as anything that provides medical care, you still come under OSHA. And OSHA in that regard, besides the EEOC, does regulate what you can do. And they do recognize that you have to vaccinate people. OSHA does typically, although it's somewhat state dependent, they will state if you develop COVID in the workplace, if particularly there's a cluster, then it's work related. If you have good policies in the workplace and you have social distancing and masking, you have isolated cases here and there, you don't necessarily have to accept this as a workers' comp or an OSHA related case or a recordable case. So in that regard, there's some issues that are coming up. If you have a vaccination, it will not be a recordable case because the chances of getting positive once you vaccinate are quite low. Another incentive for employers to do that. Keep in mind though, in the best case scenario, what all the organizations with which I work are now advocating is that it's a 95% effective vaccine. What that means is 5% ineffective. What that means is you still have a relatively high risk of 5% of contracting COVID, even with the vaccine. And we don't know how long that'll last. I mean, we know 90 days, that's it. After 90 days, as far as we know, the 5% could be 10%, 30%. We just don't know. We don't have enough data.
That's scary.
So, it's true. And
Right.
because of that, they're recommending all the companies I work with.
Right.
They're saying, even though you've been vaccinated, until we get more data, which is probably to the end of this year, at least, continue to mask, continue to social distance, continue to lubricate, sanitize.
Right.
But it ain't over yet, guys. It ain't over.
And I guess, from my perspective as an employee, at a law firm, I know we've taken a lot of precautions, and Dr. Trangle has actually guided us on a lot of that. I have not actually been back in my office in almost a year now. And I'm feeling like I've taken every protection to protect my kids and my parents, et cetera. I'm willing to have the vaccine when it becomes available to me. I would feel uncomfortable going into an office where I knew people had refused to take the vaccine and there was still risk for me, because I do anticipate that as the vaccine use goes up, some of the precautions are going to go down in terms of whether it's the cleanliness, the mask use, the social distancing. So I guess in terms of creating policies in the workplace, which is really what I know a lot of my healthcare clients are asking me, how do we develop policies about the vaccine? Who, when we're going to require the vaccine, what to do if you're unwilling to take it, what to do it if you don't want to come in because, other people haven't taken it. This is a very complicated topic, but unfortunately, employers are kind of in the position of having to create a framework that answers everybody's questions. You've got the employee who just doesn't believe in it. You got the employee who's never coming back unless everybody's vaccinated, right? You've got the employee, and the risk is still there. That if 5% may be increasing, I don't know, but I don't want to take that chance. It's this whole situation seems to be the luck of the draw. Either you get nothing or you die. You just don't know where the dice is going to roll, right? And then you've got the long-term chronic people in the middle. And I know people like me, the average person, I don't want anything like that. And I certainly don't want to bring it home to my family. So how do you kind of balance these different concerns and come up with a policy? It almost seems impossible to take into account so many different employee perspectives.
There's a lot of politics involved in this stuff too. I mean, right now, what you're saying as a lawyer in a law firm is the same thing I'm hearing from the teachers in schools, the healthcare workers in mental health institutions and addiction medical centers. Everybody has the same. They're all average people they're above average, but they're people that don't necessarily are over 80 years old or 65 or have medical issues. So what I've seen happen is, and it depends a lot on which state you're in, what your politics are, and how aggressive you want to be. On one end, you do nothing. And in many regards, many companies and organizations and school districts do nothing. And the others where because of the negative effect of doing nothing, I mean, teaching outside remotely is not, I've seen enough schools to realize it's really not a solution. It's not good, it doesn't work. There's a lot of things that fall by the wayside. So I used to think you could do that, but I think for, you're talking about K to 12, it's not that effective. Maybe for college, but K to 12, no. So I see schools forcing their teachers back and they don't want to come back. Many of them don't want to come back. So what we do, we've instituted testing policies, protocol, strict social distancing, even disciplinary things. And if they still don't come back, they're not getting paid. And I don't know if that's going to result in lawsuits or not, but we're trying to do things that make sense, that accommodate, that have logic and science behind it. Same thing will happen with vaccination. I think that's going to be another component as we transition from doing more testing to more vaccination. We're going to have the same questions come up. But ultimately, I think we will do testing more, and we will do vaccination, and that will be part of the solution.
What do you think, Aretta?
I think that rather than policies, I think we ought to develop evolving protocols because the situation is pretty fluid. And I think the best thing to do, much like the situation that we have currently, where we've developed a lot of protocols for people returning to work. So in March, the whole country shut down. And subsequent to that, beginning in June, we started to phase in workers returning to the office, what protocols we put in place to make sure there was no, to the extent we could, to ensure that there was no proliferation of the virus within the work environment that was being recalled. I know that each state governor passed protocols for the return to work of both, and the current staying at work for essential workers. And we've been dealing with these issues on a regular basis regarding PPE, people's refusal to use PPE, people's refusal to come back into the workplace after the workplace was reopened, and protocols were put in place for the safety and health of all the workers that would be returning. So, Ericka, to address your personal concerns, I mean, there's never going to be an absolute way to reassure everyone who's returning to the workplace that they won't catch a cold, they won't catch a virus, whether it's COVID or anything else. But I think right now what we're seeing is a much greater awareness of the health and safety for employees and the need for each individual to comply with, the basic concepts of distancing, mask wearing, and concern for themselves and for others in the workplace. I mean, these are not going to go away, these protocols. Now, in the context of the vaccine, I think that, each employer is going to have to make a determination on how they're going to roll out their protocols for recommendation of the vaccine and incentivizing the vaccine. I'm seeing more larger employers outside of the health context that are not mandating. They're instead incentivizing, encouraging, and promoting the vaccine when you're able to get it. So
how can you mandate it? You can't even get it at this point.
Yeah, right. At this time, we're kind of a little bit ahead of the game, even having this discussion, because as Dr. Trangle just noted, we can't get it. You and I can't get it. Even Dr. Trangle can't get it at this point based on the Cleveland Clinic's current situation. If he's a Cleveland Clinic patient, I don't know. But anyway, my point is that I think we're going to have to deal with this on an evolving basis. And I think each employer will have to deal with this on an evolving basis based on the number of employees they have. And quite honestly, to the extent they can establish that the need for the vaccine is job related and consistent with business necessity. And that's really the test under the ADA with regard to, conducting any type of, medical examination. And this, even though the vaccine itself is not an examination, there are implications of laws that are long existing laws that are going to have to be dealt with in the context of this subject. So again, I think it's going to be something that I would say is more of a protocol, at least initially, rather than a policy, and a business decision made by each employer, regarding where they want to put their resources at this time.
I think it's going to be difficult for most employers to show business necessity of being vaccinated. I mean, you're gonna probably have to suck it up and come in here if it's complaint time.
Probably, you're right, and I guess it's going to be really interesting, and maybe you do that and you still wear your mask because you're not comfortable with.
You will
the
wear
number.
your mask. You will be coming in. You will be wearing your mask and
Yeah.
you'll be distancing and using sanitation.
Right.
The same protocols you've been living with for almost a year. You can continue to live.
Right.
You're a law firm. It's different than, let's say, we are a counselor. Let's say a teacher of special ed.
Right.
With special needs, where you have to be in close contact, or you're a physical therapist, or you're not a
Right.
physical therapist, so you really have to be in close contact, like your dental workers too. That's a different level, it's a different standard.
Right.
I can see that being mandated with business necessity. You have to have a good reason and rationale. I cannot see a law firm having, however, the same mandates you're going to have a dental practice. Your client,
Absolutely.
yes,
They may just never see me again. I don't know. But so just like, I want to kind of start wrapping up, and I want to make sure everybody listening to this takes away some really important points here. And as I mentioned, most of my clients are healthcare workers, and they're really trying to know, what should we be doing now? And I like, Aretta, what you had to say is, let's look at what the protocols are. We're going to keep testing. We're going to keep doing the distancing. We're going to keep up the mask. And then to make that decision as the vaccine becomes available, we are going to encourage it, or because of our the nature of our business, we are going to require it. And encouraging, Aretta and I were sharing some articles this week. We saw businesses offering free marijuana for getting vaccinated. We saw companies offering payments, and I'm sure there's certain other perks. Some people do anything for that kind of stuff. But then you have the mandated, and that's really interesting. The situation where you have to make that analysis. What kind of business are we? What kind of risk are you at coming in and working here, or are you putting other people out when you come in here, and kind of doing that analysis and saying, can we accommodate you, which most small healthcare providers most likely can't. They don't, there's no other role, no other job, et cetera. So doing that analysis. And I guess the next question, talk with your lawyer, obviously, in doing this. My concern is, what are the legal repercussions then of a bad analysis? You get sued under the ADA, you get sued for wrongful termination because you let someone go because, hey, they're your only hygienist and they refuse to get vaccinated. And frankly, you want everybody vaccinated, and the patients want to know everybody's vaccinated, so those kinds of things. So we've got termination issues, we've got ADA issues, potential, I would guess, discrimination, letting certain people go but not others because of the claims they make, et cetera. What other kinds of, if they follow the protocol that you're recommending and they do their best to come up with the guidelines that they're going to use for their business, what kind of legal issues other than the ones I mentioned, do you think they really need to worry about?
Well, if you're asking me, I mean, it's always shocking what issues can come up that you just can't think of on the fly, because every employer is different, and equally different is the context of how their workforce is comprised and what issues they bring to the table. But obviously, just so you know, the EEOC has recommended, if you go through all of the typical conversations and you have no reasonable accommodation, they haven't necessarily said you should terminate the employee. They're not going that far. They're saying maybe you put them on an extended unpaid leave. But the reality is you're taking an adverse action against them because you're not letting them come to work and do their job, right? So you're going to get, you'll probably get an influx of EEOC discrimination charges and other types of, there may even be a group of employees who are collectively suffering from the exclusion from the workplace that come together to bring an action. So, there could be endless possibilities, Ericka, about where this goes. But as I see it, small healthcare providers like, and small practices like a geriatric practice who have patient after patient who are in the high risk age of contracting any type of virus, including the COVID-19 virus. I mean, I would think that, you're going to be able to persuade and or mandate that your employees get vaccinated when they're able to do so. My one thing I want to say in wrapping up is that in order to avoid, if you're going to mandate and you're a small employer in the healthcare arena, the best way to do it is not necessarily force your employees to go to your own doctor, but to allow them to go to their own healthcare provider, or allow them to go to a pharmacy that's going to have the ability to provide the vaccine, and simply request proof of having been vaccinated, to distance yourself from any type of exposure to the person's personal medical information, which they otherwise would not have had to disclose. And if you're forcing them to go to an affiliated position or practice with the employer, then that would run afoul potentially of the ADA, which is what the EEOC has actually said and recommended against.
Let me just suggest that, first of all, that's not even practical. The doctors that work with these companies don't have access to vaccine anyhow. They even if they wanted to get vaccine, they don't. None of them, from Disney World to any of the bigger companies I've worked with, they don't. That's not how it works. People are still just shuffling around trying to figure out where to get vaccine. It depends on which state. Secondly, there are legitimate reasons not to get vaccine. I mean, people can have allergies. They can have specific reactions to viruses. They can actually have multiple comorbidities and medications that will preclude them from taking it. So just because somebody doesn't want to, they may not be able to. I have a number of people that have been advised by the doctors because of immune compromised diseases and even the inability to make antibodies because of underlying diseases, they shouldn't even bother to get vaccinated. So that's part of it.
That's a great.
What you can do, and this is kind of a medical legal question. I see this in the workers' comp arena. You can disincentivize people from not getting vaccine if they're healthy. In other words, Amazon always needs people. I'm sure they'd be happy to bring in a dental hygienist to do the Amazon work. She's probably smart, but he's smart and can do whatever work they have to be done there.
Right.
And I see a lot of that stuff going on. There's organizations that do that. That's all they do. They take the injured worker and they put him someplace else because he can't be accommodated in a smaller employer. And to the extent that you may have a dental worker that wants to work for Amazon, it's a good job. But if not, then they will figure out what else to do.
Great answer. And Aretta, just one related point. A client asked me yesterday whether there was anything illegal about maintaining a list of who have been vaccinated. And I was like, well, for what purpose? And it might be just to make sure that the people got both of them. So who you're going to let work in the operating room, let's say the surgical suite versus not, who you're going to let interact with patients that are at higher risk or not. And I guess, is that kind of a delicate area to start getting into, to keep that kind of list? Or you think it would be an appropriate protocol if you're not mandating,
I can answer that a little bit because it's an OSHA issue that comes up all the time in companies. We have to keep lists of people vaccinated for hepatitis, for varicella, for bloodborne pathogen programs, etc. We're allowed to do that. We're allowed to mandate, we know it. We have to keep separate records, completely separate records that has limited access, and certainly not any of the management organizational staff can see it, only the medical staff. And even the HR people are not supposed to see it. So you can do that. In fact, OSHA says you have to do that. I don't know how the EEOC rules about that. You need to maintain that confidentiality for sure.
Right.
Well, it's rare when a doctor steals the thunder from the lawyer, but I'm gonna have to agree that so the EEOC has allowed us to keep lists of people who have when we take temperatures, keep a list of temperatures for everyone entering. You just have to make sure that you keep any kind of medical information separate from and confidential, and so that only those with a need to know have access. So I would say that it wouldn't necessarily be illegal to keep a list of people that have been vaccinated, but you need to maintain it in a way that it doesn't violate the law, which is
for this, Ericka, for your small employers, the only way they can do that is really contract with an outside group, outside doctor or some organization to keep that information. They're so small, otherwise everybody's going to know everything.
Right.
Which is why you cannot do it internally.
And I would guess misuse of that list is a concern. I know treating people differently, for non-legitimate purposes because, they've been vaccinated or not. Those are the kind of things that a lot of employees worry about as well. Well, I think it's been such a great conversation. I just want to give each of you the opportunity to kind of wrap up with any final thoughts on this topic. I mean, we could talk for hours about this. I find it really fascinating. And why don't you tell me each, what your final thoughts are?
Dr. Trangle, you want to go first, or you want me to take
you go first, Aretta.
Well, I would recommend that everyone do their best to stay abreast of the evolving and ever burgeoning, growing information in this topic, and in terms of availability of even the vaccination itself. I would, in my mind, I think generally speaking, where you can incentivize and encourage your employees to get vaccinated, I think that's the better approach for now, to avoid any legal pitfalls in the process of making sure that everybody avails themselves of the vaccine when it becomes available to them. Of course, if you have any questions and any specific situations arise that with regard to unique employees and the interactive process and trying to dodge the bullet of violations of any existing laws, you should reach out to an attorney to help guide you through that process. Because again, there's no sweeping advice that would cover each scenario that you're going to encounter, whether you're a small employer or a large employer in this area, especially given that the law, the legal issues, and the medical issues as they conflate are still evolving.
Great.
I would say, if you look at the overall bigger picture, there's some things I'd like you to keep in mind. This pandemic is not going to be over, maybe not even in our lifetimes. We're going to have to live with this virus. The reason I say that is you need to get up to almost 90% herd immunity to get really that kind of lack of transmission. I don't see that happening in this country. I certainly don't see that happening around the world for a long time. On top of that, as we've just seen recently, viruses mutate just like flu does, and we don't know how effective the vaccine will be. We don't know how long the vaccine is going to work. We don't know how long the antibodies will be there. I mean, it's rare you get a vaccine like smallpox or measles where you get cured for life. It's rare. It's more like the flu. Every year, every 2 years, they change the antigenetic makeup and you get another one that's only 50% effective. Right. So we're going to be living with this for a while. When they say 95%, they're only looking at probably 90 days. That's all they have data for. They don't know how long it's going to last. They're 90 days effective at 95%, and that's it. So we're going to be living with this for a long time. There are 20 more vaccines that are on the ramp now to be approved in this country. And there's probably more. I don't suggest you take Sputnik at this point in time, even though I know Russia's really promoting the hell out of it. I don't know if you guys follow that information, but it depends which vaccines. The one in the Western, developed in the Western countries, I think are going to be reasonably safe. Some of the others, you have to question what they're doing. China and Russia, what they're doing. It's the political game for these guys more than anything else. We're going to be doing social distancing. We're going to be doing masking and sanitation. We're going to have this in our environment for this coming year, probably for the next 2 years. We will not have the data in to know how safe vaccine is and how long it lasts. Safe, probably. How long it lasts, another story. It's not going to be there for a year or so, at least, even though, we're rushing to get vaccine and people think once you get it, they're safe. And I feel the same way. I mean, I know that 95% safety is better than, none for sure. But I don't know if you have comorbidities and you have advanced age and how much you go past the 90 days, how long it's going to last. So you really, if you let your guard down, to Ericka's point about going back in the office, it'd be premature at this point in time. Mm-hmm. You need to talk to your lawyer. You need to get policies and protocols because it's not going away at the end of the year. If you think you're going to hunker down and it's going to all be done next winter, you're sadly mistaken.
Right. I appreciate that. So I guess the big takeaway here is that we can develop protocols for how, as employers, we're going to handle vaccinations, but we also still need to have great protocols on how we're handling PPE, how we're handling illness, how we're handling social distancing. And if you don't have those policies, you really do need them. You may have gotten away with it so far, but maybe not for much longer. So we really need to look at this whole topic as a very comprehensive one. Vaccines are just one piece of it now. And this is something that's going to be a challenge to employers over the next couple of years at least. It's not going away. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity, whether it's coming from federal law, state law, or maybe some case law eventually as well, right? So we'll have to see what happens. But thank you so much for being such a great source of information. We hope everybody enjoyed our topic today on the Health Law Hotspot, and we certainly welcome any questions you may have, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was fun. Take care.
Three. The Roetzel Health Law Hotspot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Roetzel Health Law Hotspot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Roetzel Health Law Hotspot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.